I've talked about these 2 episodes so much over the weekend.
What's really interesting about the episode on AI, which is coming up now, is that we recorded it on the same day that we recorded Rich Howell of the 4-Day Workweek. And just having the 2 back to back was really interesting, wasn't it, Dan? We both had this response afterwards like, oh my God, mind blown. Why are we talking about these small solutions when this is going to be a massive upheaval? So yeah, that was definitely what we took away. In this one, we talked to Dr. Alastair Moore, who has really been at the forefront of AI and machine learning in the UK and beyond for decades and is very much in the middle of the conversation now. He has held teaching and research positions at UCL Computer Science, UCL School of Management, and Peking HSBC Business School. He's a member of the Enterprise Fellowship Board for the Royal Academy of Engineering and has also served on the Industry Advisory Board for the UCL Center for Artificial Intelligence. He's also a serial entrepreneur, including the acquisition of Satalia.com by WPP to create their global AI lab, and his new workforce product, Deepflow.com, which is what he's working on now, which applies advances in Gen AI to business management. He's a busy man, and safe to say that he challenged a lot of our misconceptions around AI. What do you think, Dan?
I completely agree. It literally blew my mind, and I'm a real layman's terms person, and I'm a processor. I like to really, think and take things in. And I think my role in this session was bringing it back to that, to really simplifying it down and understanding where this started and where it is actually going. So give the episode a listen. It's a real journey of a conversation.
And it's also the last one of season 1. So we really appreciate everyone who's been listening. We know there's a few of you out there, and hopefully it's a growing number. We've got a really exciting emerging lineup for season 2. And yeah, we hope that you'll tune in. But in the meantime, prepare to be terrified. Yeah. Also, just a quick note, you might notice some gentle whining in the background of this episode. That is Alastair's dog. In a true work is weird now moment, he was at home and his dog was pawing at the door for his attention. So don't be alarmed. Welcome to the Work is Weird Now podcast. Whether you're nearing retirement, entering the workforce for the first time, or caught somewhere in the confusing muddle in the middle, you're likely sensing it and you're probably living it. We know we are, and we want to know why. Listen in as we interview experts and everyday people like you to find out how best to navigate the ever-growing weirdness of work in the modern age. Hello. This week we have Alastair Moore joining us. He is, I can't even fully explain all the things that he is, but they all relate to machine learning and AI. He received a PhD in machine learning many years ago. Don't want to age him too much, but long before it was a popular topic for many of us, and has really been at the forefront of AI and the immersion of AI in the UK over the past 20 years or so. Would you say that's fair, Alastair?
Yeah, possibly 20 years is a stretch, but I've got a lot of grey hair now, so it might be true.
Great. Okay, so it'll be really interesting to be able to talk to him, ask some questions around what the impact of AI will be on work. We'll start today's episode, as we start every episode, by talking about what is your weird work moment of the week. And why don't you kick us off, Dan?
Sure. So mine's quite relevant for this chat because I did a personal brand on LinkedIn presentation to the company that I'm currently in-house at. So 90 senior leaders, and I felt like I almost used a dirty word because I was like, if you're really struggling for what to say on LinkedIn, and it is like quite a tricky thing when you're like, what am I going to say? It's like, ask AI, like use ChatGPT. And I said, I was like, oh my God, have I revealed like a dirty secret? I'm being really frank. I've only just started using ChatGPT and AI in the past like few months, in all honesty, but only because I've noticed other people using it in their narrative more than Google it. Like I'm the Google it era, whereas now people are like, well, just ask ChatGPT. So I really stepped back and was like, oh, that's weird that I've just said that I've used that. And is that okay? Am I going to get sacked now?
I hope not, because I use it every day, probably to some extent. So my weird work moment of the week was a similar kind of thing, actually. I hired a voiceover artist to do some work for a client of mine to speak over a corporate video. And we did have a discussion about whether or not we use an AI voice. My experience with AI voices is that they are not as editable as we'd like them to be in terms of communicating nuance and emotion and inflection and things like that at the moment, or at least the tools I've been using haven't been. So we are using real people, but then we actually had to go back in and change a word. So the option was to go back to the voiceover artist and ask them to re-record the whole thing and then potentially pay them again. Or we could just do it with AI. So we could actually duplicate her voice, replace the word, and just make it a seamless link into the script as it was, which is the first time I've done that. And in this ever-emerging world of AI, that experience seems to be more and more common, that I have a completely new experience every week relating to it. So yes, how about you, Alastair? What was your weird work moment of the week?
My weird work moment was reading a scientific paper for the first time that was entirely done by AI and then blind reviewed and got accepted as the first ever paper to get into a research conference where no human was involved.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is that actually legal? Is it?
Yeah,
can that happen?
it was done with the consent of the academic chairs, but it's the first time the research was designed, executed, and written up and submitted by a machine.
Incredible. I remember you telling me, actually, just Alastair and I know each other socially over the last 10 years or so. I remember you telling me that one of the big sort of watershed moments for it was when AI was passing the bar exam to be a lawyer. And that was probably at least a few years ago now that started happening, right?
So I mean, you can argue whether it fully passes, etc. But it started, the real change was GPT-3 to 4, and 4 started to be able to pass professional exams. So that would have been, I'm not great at this, but probably Q1 2023.
Yeah, okay. Wow, so we've come a long way since then, if we can now write research papers.
I mean, that's, again, you could argue that it was a fairly simple paper, etc. But the point is it passed blind review. So no, the quality of scientific work was indistinguishable.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So the other question we ask is, are you where you thought you'd be at this point in your career, and why or why not?
No idea. I don't think I've ever really planned it or thought about it very much. So I could say that I'm happy with where I am in my career, but to suggest that I am where I thought I would be is probably a stretch. Like, I just didn't really think about it.
So take us through how you got to where you are today and what your many pies that you've got your fingers in are currently.
I left school, went to university. I guess after university, I did kind of postgraduate degrees. I took a couple of years out and then went back and did a PhD. And then after a PhD, I span out a company from the university. I have had a sort of parallel track type career. So I guess I've worked with multiple companies. I've worked on companies that are my own. I've exited companies. I've had a teaching role at various universities. So I don't know what don't know what that's called these days, but like, it's not necessarily that normal to do everything in little bits simultaneously.
Right. And what are your current projects then? What are you working on these days?
I'm doing more investment than I used to. So I guess I'm investing in kind of AI and Web3 technology companies. I'm actively building new companies. I've got a new company called Deep Flow, which is literally about workflows and starting to automate or assist people in the completion of work. I'm doing quite a lot of work on agentic AI, which means AI that has agency and can go off and do things. So, you've got to the stage, I've given the evidence of like a scientific paper being done, but you've got to the point now where you can sort of do 2-3 hours of work in 10 minutes because the machine will work in cohort or collaborate with you and go off and do stuff and bring it back and you can check it. And you're starting to see that technology deployed across teams. So then you've got like a team of people and 50% of the team members are AI. And partially completing and handing off bits of work to each other. So that's the kind of state of the art inside some very early adopter companies, and I guess you're going to start to see that diffuse or become more standard practice.
Are there particular sectors that seem to have a greater appetite for this sort of thing?
Coding inside the tech companies were closer to the invention and therefore have been faster to adopt. But like in some of the leading research labs, 50% of the software code is now written by machine. So half of the work product is automated, which is, I would say, the furthest anyone's got so far, in terms of real adoption. And that's obviously not a whole company. That's a part of a company that happens to be very well set up to adopt. I would say the real economy, almost nothing has happened so far. Yeah.
Okay, well, that brings us to a good point, I think. There's a lot of figures out there, expectations around how many jobs will be displaced by machines in the future, right? So there's a whole bunch of different statistics that we could quote right now. But from your perspective, on a scale from 1 to 10, how worried should we be?
Worried? Depends if worried is the right word, right? If you view it one way, you should be 10 out of 10 worried. And if you view it another way, you should be 10 out of 10 optimistic. Okay. For an altered reality.
So let's start with the first one then. Who would be 10 out of 10 worried?
I think if you do any sort of knowledge work, so this is the beginnings of a white collar revolution. Like my estimate, and it's difficult to say, but I would anticipate all white collar work being fully automatable by 2030.
Okay, well, that's pretty soon.
So that means like your best lawyers will be machines and your best doctors could be machines by the end of the decade.
We take a hot minute because I'm a very simple person and go back to the beginning before we terrify, before people hit stop on the podcast. Just when did AI start? Like when did this literally become a thing?
So AI is an umbrella term for all sorts of work and goes back nearly 100 years, right? Probably to the 1940s is when we started working on this stuff. But what is currently referred to as AI are kind of, and has made the difference, are recent advances in language modeling. So being able to text or chat or talk to a computer. And those breakthroughs really happened in about 2019-ish onwards. But to put it in context, and this is like, this is on the 10 out of 10 making people worry. We were building machines in 2022 with a sort of comparative IQ of about 40, i.e. not much of the population. We were building machines in 23 with an IQ of 100, in 24, 150, I would think 200 by the end of the year. And so you've gone from being able to build machines that are basically incapable in 2020 to machines that are more capable than the majority of the population in 2025.
And can we just define the machine?
So the machine is what's called in this context is what's called a large language model, but it is a piece of software running on hardware that is able to communicate it with human language. So if you talk, like you said earlier, ChatGPT, for example, as one application that has a model running in the background, you can type in some text and it will give you back a reply in text. That is what the machine is. Something that can give you natural language-based outputs.
Okay, so just to clear this question off, are we going to be destroyed by these machines? Is that the inevitable outcome of this?
The last survey I saw was that people working in the field thought there could be a 40% chance of an existential threat.
Right.
It has gone from being something that a very few people have talked about, and people have talked about it for ages, right? And there is a small but a growing body of work in academia around controlling threats. And I guess people started taking it more seriously in 2015, 2016, probably. But the reality is that the capability of these machines has kind of outstripped everyone's expectation. If you'd, again, anecdotally from my perspective, there was a good chance it would happen mid-century, but it was like a 2050s, 2060s type problem. It was not a 20s or, this will be done by 2030. And so that has taken everyone by surprise. Basically, a whole load of techniques that are relatively simple worked far better than people anticipated.
What do you mean it will be done?
You will have, whether or not we think of them as actually intelligent, but you will have machines that give the behavior of being intelligent, fully intelligent. Now, if you think about the way a technology phase changes or revolutions have happened, obviously, the Industrial Revolution sort of mechanized work, and so there's a lot less people that move stuff from A to B or dig holes in the ground, for example. Right? If we were going to build the canals now, the canals would be dug by diggers, not by labour. And as this has gone on, obviously people have moved further and further up the stack into cognitive tasks. And so what we think of as white-collar work now, or knowledge work, is people using their brains. We have just got to the point where we started to build machines that will start to eat away at what people currently do in cognitive work, because it'll be mechanized. So at the moment, you can do, like I would say, again, anecdotally, you can do a couple of hours of work in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. But by the end of the year, you'd be able to do a day or a few days of work in 10 minutes. And by next year, you'd be able to do a week's worth of work. And by the end of the decade, you might be able to do like 50 years worth of work in a morning, whatever that means. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to comprehend.
Yeah. Right.
So what people currently do as work, in the same sense that like lots of people don't go out and collect firewood for a living, it won't be the same. Like lots of things that people currently do, because it requires cognitive activity, is likely to be done by a machine in some capacity. Now, how that actually manifests itself is still completely to be determined, and there are lots of ambiguities. But you're likely to see the start of legislation. Does a person have to do this, right? I mean, if you go back to say when they first invented like the elevator, it took like 20 years for them to say that there didn't have to be a human operating the lift. And now we all get in automatic elevators, and sometimes you don't even get to choose the floor anymore, right? It just does it for you. So it's not once the machine has the capability that the economy will adopt it outright even. But I think here in this scenario, there will be a lot of pressure to adopt it, because there will be such significant advantages over your perceived competition that non-adoption, I think, will be quite a challenge.
Right. So at the moment, we're using quite a lot of AI in creative work, which is probably no surprise to you. We're using AI for imagery, for idea generation, that sort of thing. But at the moment, it relies very heavily on our ability to give it the appropriate prompts. And I assume that will also phase out, right? So eventually it will effectively be more or less self-sustaining, or the prompts will be easier to deliver. Is that correct?
I think it's fair to say that for those of you listening, a prompt is the input you would put into the machine. So like the way you describe the task you want it to achieve. And you can get quite a varied response or varied output based on how well you sort of instruct it or interface with it. So that's what we mean by prompting. I guess in principle, I think that will get better and better, and the machine will get closer to being able to deliver something as you describe it. But I don't think it will disappear, in the sense that we already interface with incredibly intelligent, capable devices called humans. And if you speak to a human one way versus another, you get very different responses. So I think there will be machine psychologies to the extent that, if you will need to learn how to interface with this particular machine, just in the way that you might interface with a particular group of people, or, whatever it happens to be.
So paint me a picture of what work looks like in 2030 once all of this has happened.
I think 2030 is quite close in some sense. It's only 5 years away.
Very close.
There will be a lot of inertia in the existing systems on how people do things. I think there'll be a lot of pushback on how things are done. And, I think you'll probably see a lot more, rent seeking in some sense, right? If you think about the way law is set up, you need a license to do this and a license to do that, not because you really are completely incapable of doing it, but because it's a way of preserving an economic model. In the same way, unionization, I guess to a certain extent, is preserving existing patterns of work, whether that happens to be a conductor on a train, right, or whatever the example is. So I think there'll be a lot of inertia on the way things currently work. But the broad pattern of evolution will be you will work with machines, you will work for machines. Some of your co-workers will be machines that you interface with. Your manager might be a machine to a certain extent. Your employees might be a machine. Even if the general pattern of behavior has enough inertia that, like, the things that we currently recognize as being work are still things we recognize as being work in 2030, the way we deliver that existing work product will shift towards more machine involvement.
There have been some projections that say, yes, there'll be millions of jobs lost to machines and AI, but millions of jobs will be created as well, so we'll be fine. Is that true?
I mean, no one knows. Because I guess from my perspective, the way that sort of played out before was we moved further up the sort of cognitive stack. So there was always somewhere for people to go. In the scenario where you can't really move up the cognitive stack, then I guess there is a scenario where you're like, what do you do? Because I will be able to do the same thing at a lower marginal cost with a machine. But, if you take that to its logical conclusion, then the economy is not going to run the way it currently runs. Because you won't have people having jobs, which means you won't have people being consumers, which means you won't have a flow of capital across a system. And I can't imagine a scenario where that some version of that doesn't exist.
So that takes us into conversations about universal basic income and things like that.
Yeah, and you've seen some early experiments, and they haven't necessarily been that successful, mainly because it removes the motivation aspect or the purpose. So I think actually the UBI experiments that have been done to date have but don't quote me on this, but because I'm not read up to date, but have been of limited success. But I think you probably will have to revisit, let's not say reimagine, right? Revisit how certain distribution mechanisms and wealth distribution would work under a model where all of the market power goes to capital rather than to labour. But no one's really thought this through yet.
It's interesting you talk about purpose, because I think one of the other things that the evolution of AI has really shown us in terms of work is that, yes, we believe we need purpose in order to feel fulfilled and happy, but that also suggests that there's some sort of destination. Whereas I think what's interesting about AI is it's actually removing the struggle as well, right? So I saw recently somebody had done some copywriting work using entirely using AI. So it sort of plugged in the prompts, got the piece of work, handed it over to the client.
I should probably say I don't do any work without an AI now.
Right.
Like there would be nothing that I attempt. I just ask the machine to do it, see how well it does it. Worst case, I have to edit it.
Yeah, I mean, I always edit it, but I think what's interesting is it does help with that kind of ideation. But I think what is really fulfilling to me, at least, as being somebody who is creative, is the process as well. So it's not just about the purpose and the destination, but actually the process is also fulfilling. So that would, I think, need to be something that was also considered in whatever future job market landscape we're looking at. I guess I'll also ask the question around blue-collar work then. There are loads of gaps in the markets in the US and here for trades. People aren't training up in trades anymore. They're not doing that sort of work anymore, but there's a huge need for it.
So I think in principle, that sounds great. In practice, I think that the advances we're seeing now will deliver a robotics revolution faster than people anticipated. So I would also anticipate by 2030 basically having a semi-autonomous humanoid robot. And now, ignore the economics of this because I haven't thought about it and I haven't read enough about it, but I would imagine that most middle-income households buy a robot rather than a second car, for example. Or maybe they get rid of the car and they have an always-on house assistant. It's going to look like a bit like Star Wars. Certainly I think it'll arrive quite quickly, but certainly by 2035, even your blue-collar work will be done by a machine. Because the robot that I have in my house will be able to do the plumbing, or the robot I have in my house will do the gardening. And then you're like, okay. So, it's nice to think that everyone would revert to, well, I think nice is the wrong word there, right? Nice is a value judgment, very much depends on what you're having to do or not. But even things like people say, I don't know, people will be able to do very human things like, caring. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, but your carer can't necessarily safely pick up someone on their own. And this robot will be able to pick up someone safely on their own. And they will always be on. There won't be like what happened to your, parent with dementia in the middle of the night when they tried to do something crazy, because the robot will be there. And so, again, I think that, if I go back to your, 10 out of 10 worried, there is a dystopian version of this where you should be 10 out of 10 worried. But there is a utopian version of this where suddenly, to your point, all of the things that are incredible frictions and stresses in people's lives, in principle, could be better managed or better dealt with, because the marginal cost structure of delivery of all services will change. And so there is an opportunity to reimagine. Let me go right to the top. Right, there's an opportunity to reimagine how the state delivers services, right, in terms of social care and care work and all of these things that are incredibly difficult and expensive to run because they involve a lot of people's time. Let's be clear about that. That's why they are difficult, and they are often under the capacity for demand. Suddenly, that will get industrialized. And so I think you're entering a sort of decade where most things you can think about get industrialized, and we have not lived through that period of history.
I mean, do you think this is actually Elon Musk's ambition with Doge? Is he going to get rid of all the people providing government services and replace them with machines?
That is, I don't know if that's his particular motivation in this instance. We could talk about that at greater length, but that is absolutely the direction of travel. Right? The 21st century robotic economy is suddenly now within sight, and and super intelligence is within sight, and so there is a competitive, I wouldn't call it an arms race, but there is a competitive race happening. All the supply chains are now up for reimagining. There's a big debate around sovereignty and tech sovereignty, AI sovereignty. Like, can I rely on someone else having one of these things if it actually becomes a core competency for, running a state? Probably not, right? Because there's a chance someone else will turn it off. So, there's a lot of stuff happening suddenly.
So back to your example about carers then, because I think that's a really interesting one. Robots can arguably do a much better job at the logistical aspects of caring, right? They can change bedpans. They can alert the appropriate authorities when someone's heart rate is elevated or whatever it is they need to do. What they can't actually do if they're robots is care, right?
So I disagree.
Okay, please tell me.
I think your conception of a machine is like, that's a 20th century conception of a machine because that was true. Mm-hmm. But the machines we're building now are basically built on modeling our discourse, right? So they are empathetic. Now, are they actually empathetic? Do they have lived experience? Not at the moment. I mean, it might be different for an embodied robot, right? But they will give the perception of empathy, and they will be trained in such a way, and they have infinite patience. Like, it's like, can you say that again? Yes. Okay. Can you say that again simpler? Can you say that to me as if I was a child? Yeah. I mean, you can have infinite versions. You can have any conversation. Like, if you actually hold a conversation with one of these things, you can basically get it to do whatever you'd like it to do. And I think people will build rapport. And I think we will think of this as machine psychologies in some way. And so I think if you start off from the perception of like, yeah, but they're not really going to be able to do that, you're thinking about, I mean, I would start from the assumption of like, well, they might really be able to do everything. If that was true, how would we deliver, or how would we make use of it?
Yeah, I completely appreciate that. I guess the question is then, where are, if they exist, any limitations of that, right? When we talk about art and music and things like that, do we need humanity to create those things? Obviously, we don't need them to create those things, and they might be brilliantly constructed, and they might be even infused with emotion and to some extent lived experience at some point. But, we need humans to be human.
I don't know is the answer. I think that people obviously have an emotive attachment to a human connection. So if I think about, say, social media or something, I think about someone's following. I imagine like the economy certainly fracturing into, people having an affiliation or association with artists, and they would like, I would say the majority, at least for the first half of this century, probably want those people that they associate with to be human. But I don't think it's an absolute given. I think people will buy and sell mechanistic art. I think they'll buy and sell mechanistic music. I think most musicians or artists will end up using this technology in their creative process. Just as they have any technology, whether it's, oil paint to a stringed instrument. I mean, there's almost no one creates art in any meaningful sense without technology, because you end up using a media, and that media is itself a technology. So I think a lot of our preconceptions about what people will or won't want to affiliate with will turn out to be wrong.
Or will it just be normal for like our kids? Because there's friction for us.
It's already
we're
normal.
Relearning. For them, it's already normal, right?
I mean, you talked about Googling something, right? And actually, one of the interesting things is the search engines are kind of switching to run on these models. So actually, if you look at Google's traffic, it's actually just going up. But, would someone who's a child now who has access to these things, which I guess technically your under 13-year-olds should not be using these things, although I'll say on the record that mine is. It will completely change your expectations, right? I mean, in the same way that you could go to Wikipedia and find some information, you increasingly don't go to a static web page. You increasingly just ask a model. You have to learn some new behaviors in terms of when you can trust the model or not trust the model. In that sense, it's a lot more like working with a human. Your kids won't know any different, right?
So speaking of kids, you and I have children who are, I think, just a couple of weeks apart in age. They're both 10 years old. Has your work changed how you view your son's future, and what you would expect of the education system to provide to him to prepare him for that?
My expectations of his future, because now I have no mental model that will be relevant for when he's 20. So that needs figuring out. I guess in terms of what the education system can provide, I think it's probably optimistic to think that there will be wholesale rapid adoption, because the natural inclination is to, not unreasonably, to be slightly careful and mindful and try and do it on an evidential basis. And we probably don't have the experimental setup at a national level to be able to provide the detailed evidential basis at this point. Things will change. But, what do you... I mean, I don't really think like this as a parent, but like I get asked a lot, like, what do I tell my child to study? And it's gone from like, okay, here's the obvious things where if you jump through these hoops, the social contract, I guess, is for a large swathe of middle income and upper middle income families is you study for a long time, you develop expertise, and that expertise will be important. And that is almost certainly not true now. Like if we take, let's say it takes 20 years for us to train a best-in-class doctor in some specialism, like you might be able to train that machine in a week. We don't have any mental models for like how this might play out. We don't have any mental models for thinking how, under that scenario, you build resilience and robustness and all of the other things, right? It would be. We talked very briefly about existential risk, right? But it would be unconscionable for us to become entirely dependent in some sense. So I'd anticipate lots of people doing work because we require a certain number of people to retain that skill. You know, that's like at the moment, work has been actually delivering the thing required. And there's a good chance that work, you know, within a decade is not actually doing the thing that's required. But work might change to be something quite different. So, right, we might decide that we need, in the same way you have these heritage projects, right? You know, people retain the ability to do a stone wall or things like that. Mm-hmm. That it might be necessary for society to decide that actually there's all sorts of things that need preserving from the ability to cope with various types of shock, and therefore, you know, people are doing that work, but the system is somehow not dependent on it, right? In the same way that I guess your commercial airline pilot now gets in and presses a button and the airplane flies itself, and the pilot is there if in principle you need to take over. And to a certain extent, they spend a load of time in a simulator so that they have experience of what to do. Like, I could imagine having a surgeon that spends a lot of time in a simulator, not because they're actually doing the surgery, but because there's a scenario where an event happens where we definitely need some humans to be able to do some surgery, and these are the people who get to do it. You know, like, there's lots of stuff we just don't know how it might work.
I mean, there's also the question around what big problems are these machines going to be able to solve for us that we couldn't solve on our own? So, for example, preserving the earth for longer than we would have if we were left to our own devices. How do we create a more sustainable society, sustainable economy, that sort of thing? Or health. You know, we've heard a lot about gene therapy and different things that will allow us to have more customized healthcare. I would imagine that will only just skyrocket under the governance of machines.
I don't really know the detail of it, but I guess Google DeepMind, for example, released some research maybe a month ago now, saying that they'd completed, was it 1 billion years of drugs research in the last 5 years or something? And so they've got the first wave of AI-assisted drug discovery coming on market next year. So, you know, rapid development of technologies. Now, whether those are healthcare or sustainability in the sense of designing systems that enable us to live within an energy envelope that we're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's going to increase again, probably by the end of the decade, it will be machines designing and helping build machines that help design and build machines. And suddenly you're in a materially different reality than you were, or we are now.
Right. It's in the best case scenario where the problems of humanity have been solved, we're relieved of our need to do any
starting
work.
To be mitigated, perhaps,
right,
as opposed to solved. But, you know,
sure.
actively
just being
worked
optimistic at the end of this conversation. And we're relieved of any need for us to do hard labor or work. And suddenly we are people of leisure, living healthy in a healthy environment, and so on and so forth. And we are not, these machines are not our overlords, they're our enablers, right? That sort of best case scenario. And then I think we do return to those existential questions around what will give us purpose, what will fulfill us, how do we fill our time in a way that is productive and you know, helps to create connection and communities and things like that. Again, worst case scenario is where an iRobot type situation, right? Where they truly do become our overlords and we are merely their prey.
Yes, I think those are two ends of the spectrum. Like, yeah, I certainly see different social functions appearing. Like lots of things that people do in their spare time or for charity might have primacy, right? I imagine people having more time to be involved in politics, for example, right? I mean, again, like huge generalization, but the people that are involved in politics are either wealthy or crazy. Not true, right? But
sometimes both.
There's a scenario where lots of people might have time to be more involved in things that they would otherwise think of as secondary or ancillary. And so I think you probably get different sorts of, now whether we call these jobs, I don't know, but that you'll get lots of different social stratified roles that probably aren't exactly those roles at the moment. Community engagement, community officers, I think people would have a lot more time to be involved in the body politic than perhaps they are at the moment, both local and general. I don't know how this plays out. One of my mental models when we worry about this is to look at what the wealthiest people in the population do, right? And I think this applies to all sorts of things. You can think about, how would a retail model work? Oh, well, people have a shopper that goes around with them, right? Or people have someone that picks something out. So, okay, so everyone gets a personal shopper. Well, what does that mean? Well, that just means there's someone fulfilling a task of trying to, and then you go all the way up. To people, the people in the top, 100th percentile worry about purpose just because they don't have to get up every morning and do clock on and clock off. And the answer is obviously not. They construct a reality in which they're perfectly happy living in an economy of abundance, right, as opposed to scarcity, right? I guess our current model is basically built on the principle of some sort of material scarcity. And there are people that live in and therefore people, quote unquote, find their purpose in work, right? But I guess there's lots of people that don't live in any form of measurable scarcity. And so they're either very happy or they come up with an artificial version of that, which is I don't have the right handbag for this month. Some people live like that, right? So now I've got to go and get it. You're like, okay, so you can imagine humans and human society creating all sorts of artificial new markets and new activities. They probably aren't quite as critical to the supply chain in a sort of conventional sense as they are now. The whole of couture fashion, right? Is the hemline this angle or that angle for this season? Serves no purpose at all. Keeps people happy, keeps them engaged, gives them a social purpose.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So
I'm not. I don't want to be critical of the fashionistas that are dialing in. It's all important. It's all important.
All of our listeners wear couture. You know that, right? So what kind of advice? I'm sure you get asked this question often, but if we were just to drill this down into a few pieces of advice that you would give based on your perspective for people currently in the workforce in terms of it could be kind of skills they acquire. It could be just a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, currently in the workforce, I think you should experiment and adopt as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. Because one of the slightly peculiar or interesting is that all of these tools. Let's pretend it's a tool for the moment. There's a longer the conversation about whether it is actually a tool, but they're being released without a manual. Right, even the people that are building these machines don't really understand how they work or what they're good for. So there's a fantastic opportunity for people to try and figure out what it would be useful for them or useful for them. So I think if I was in a job now, I teach. Right, I have 170 students, and I'm just use it for everything. Figure out what it can do. Figure out what it can't do. See where it works for you. See where it doesn't work for you. No one has good answers. And it doesn't matter what the answer is because at the moment, everything's changed within a month or 3 months anyway. So, the things that the models were good for you last year is probably not the things that they're good for this year. And again, I think that rate of perceived improvement will happen for at least another couple of years, regardless of the technical advances.
And so there really is, at this point, no opt-out, is what we're saying, right? There's no way to step away from this and just say, look, I'm actually going to go the opposite direction and not be a part of this revolution.
I think absolutely you could, there'd be a return of some sort of Ludditism. Absolutely. And, those subcultures might, look equally as specific as Mormonism or something, right? It's not like we don't have human cultures or subcultures or whatever the appropriate term is that don't already ostracize the use of existing standard perceived technology. And you could certainly, I guess the society's challenge is to allow a happy existence for people that definitely don't want anything to do with this. And, I guess your point about art, there's probably a huge value to be found in taking a particular stance on adoption or not adoption, and it would just be part of your, public brand, for want of a better word. I'm speaking to branding people.
Just one thing we haven't talked about is the deep fake stuff that we hear about on the regular. What impact do you think that will have on our interaction with social media and things like that over time?
Over time, I think that we will deploy technologies that can give a guarantee of provenance. And you've seen lots of experiments. BBC is working on stuff like in time, we will sort of, in this arms race, catch up, and there will be authenticated sources of information. At the moment, you are in the middle of the maelstrom, and there is absolutely no way you can believe anything. And so, to a certain extent, that makes it perhaps more dangerous than we will be on the other side. But there is absolutely no way that you could consume media of any form, audio, visual, text, and assume it's genuine. So the largest thing that I have personally seen was like a fraud case where they did a Zoom call with the CEO, and then they cloned the CEO on the call. 3 minutes later, that they called back the CFO and did a £70 million fraudulent transfer. That was more than a year ago.
Yeah.
So, one thing I would say to your audience is have a safe word. Particularly, like, one of the biggest things you're getting in South America at the moment, to my understanding, is like people pretend kidnapping children. So they'll clone the child digitally, then they'll call the grandparents or something. The child's just at school. Grandparents don't know that. They'll extract money for kidnapping a pretend child. And so you've got a very real risk, particularly with elderly people at the moment, on them trying to navigate this nuance, right? You could pick up the telephone and there can be someone at the end that sounds like they are your family, and they're not. They're just a machine. Like, I have a complete deep fake version of me that I use for teaching.
Is that what we're looking at right now?
No. But you see, without the safe word, you've got no way of knowing it.
We'll never know.
We'll never know. I have two questions. You mentioned that tech industries have been the early adopters. Who's next? Who's hot on the heels? What industries do you think are going to be that will rocket off the back of this?
I think it probably doesn't affect the network effects of very large companies. So I think if you've already got distribution in a market, you can ride this wave slightly. I think where it really starts to bite is probably the middle market. So if I have a small size company, let's say it's 500 people for the sake of argument, there's a chance that I am now competing against 5 people with machines. And so, the incumbent market knowledge of how to operate, which before would have been constrained by access to capital and access to talent, is suddenly going to be unchained. So I think probably early on, the adoption is in the up and coming smaller companies that can take market share, not from a giant company, because I think distribution still wins at the moment, but from a medium-sized company. Suddenly you're looking down, not up, because you're at far greater risk from a small talented team than you were before.
So it's less sector level, it's more business size.
That's my current interpretation. Yeah, I mean, just think about it. It's basically giving highly motivated people superpowers. Yeah, like I would have needed 10 people to work on this, and now I can hire one person and we're good to go. It's a different reality.
And my other question is, if this has potentially sparked interest of people wanting to really work in AI, and I suppose inspiring generations below, like, what is there a type of personality type, like,
perhaps before the stratification of human society meant that there were these kind of archetypes, And I just don't think that will be the case, right? We're talking about the majority of software engineering being done by machine by 2026. I mean, there's like companies just aren't hiring software engineers suddenly. Not because we can actually do it now, and not because, there's no guarantee that that's inevitable, but it's not like, oh, I want to work in AI, I'm going to do X, right? You're going to need psychologists and physicists and politicians, and like you're going to work in this with this technology regardless of your skill set and regardless of your interests. So, if I was telling people what to study, it's gone from like, you should do this, this, and this, to you're going to be surrounded by very capable machines and you should do whatever interests you. You know what I mean? It's, I think it's quite, again, I think at the moment it's quite a different mindset change. Because the role of education, the role of expertise is going through a change.
Yeah. Wow, Dan, lots to think about. This has been a fascinating and terrifying conversation. Really appreciate it, Alastair. If people want to get in touch with you, talk to you about whatever it is that you've got going on right now, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, probably. Can find me on LinkedIn. Or some other. I should have the canned answer, but I don't.
That's okay. LinkedIn is what most people say.
They should follow your show.
Exactly.
And come and find me.
I've got a closing question for Alice. How scared are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, I will be honest and say that Alastair and I went out for a dinner with our spouses a few years back, right after this whole kind of acceleration had taken place. And I was so terrified after that meal. It haunted me for months. I think actually this has been relatively light in comparison to that. So I think I was past the initial horror and I'm feeling okay.
I would say it took me about 3 months to get beyond my initial terror. It's like, okay, this is just happening, whether you like it or not. You're going to live through this, and I guess you sort of like, oh my god, what does that mean? And then you're like, okay, well, I think the other thing that's interesting, it basically means the same for everyone. So it's not like, oh, the creative sector is going to be upended, right? Oh, the technology sector is going to be upended. Like everything, everyone's in the same boat. It's quite nice in some sense, right? Once every X number of generations, you get the opportunity to reimagine how stuff might actually work. And this is one of these 20-year periods. So you're going to live through it. We won't do a lot of things the way we currently do them, would be my guess.
I mean, I personally like to think about it as the same things that are important today will be important tomorrow, right? Things like our relationships with our friends and family, our ability to interact in the various communities that we're part of, and the rewards that connection brings. So for me, this could give us even greater opportunities to do that. Work has been in many ways a distraction. As we discussed many times, Dan, on our various different podcast episodes, the way that work has been set up over the years is not necessarily conducive to living a full, rewarding life. And so now maybe we'll have an opportunity to optimistically do more of that.
Yeah, you get a lot of women that exit senior roles in the workforce at various stages because it just doesn't mesh particularly well. And that's normally because you need additional capacity or you need additional responsiveness, and now the machine will take over.
Exactly.
So, like, my machines will be available and responsive and will do what is required for me. And so you might start to see much more equitable, for want of a better word, outcomes than were manifestly possible in previous versions of the economies we've managed to build. That sounds optimistic.
Yeah. I'm going to end on a positive note. Alastair, thank you so much. I know you're a really busy guy. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Really fascinating conversation.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks
Do you mind if I
much.
get a quick picture? We haven't done this one for a while. This is our last guest episode of season 1. This is amazing.
Blimey.
Thank you.
Only if you share it.
Absolutely. I'll tag you. I'll get the machine to tag you. Thank you.
Eminently possible. Great.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
Pleasure.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any Work is Weird moments to share, please find us on LinkedIn and let us know what they were. In the meantime, have a wonderfully weird week, and we look forward to seeing you next time.